Good morning, everyone. So what we hope to do is to show you a little bit about a program we created in 2009, and it was called the Rising Scholars Program, which is still is running in the district right now, which sometimes I wonder when you turn in terms of talking about running a program in a district, because I think if a system is broken, then you need to change the system, but we typically have a program. And then a new superintendent comes in and then comes up with a new program. But no one ever really goes back and see if that program met the tenets in which you were trying to work on. And so Mr. Weeks, who's a doctoral student, and myself, we did an internship this summer, and we decided to go back and look and find out what tenets of that program worked or did not work for those students. And first we want to share with you the objective in the first place. Why did we actually create this program and what happened as a result of that program? So, year 2005, the Ann Arbor schools reached some statistics that was really startling to myself and to others about the achievement gap between Caucasians and African American males. And so they wanted to look at that. And so before I do that, I want to show you what the makeup of the district in 2008, around that time that we were looking at the program, what the percentage in terms of the breakdown of race, African Americans, Hispanics, so you get an idea. The district was about, in each high school, there was probably close to 2,500 students in each of the high schools at that time. Okay. And in 2013-14 right now, if you look at it, it hasn't changed. And so I just want to give you an idea. So when we were looking at Ann Arbor schools and looking at Pioneer in particular, you'll see right here, Pioneer was graduating folks at 94th percentile. So that's pretty cool, right? Okay. So you're wondering how a district that's thriving so well had some issues with the underserved kids when they were graduating at 94th percentile. When you look at the ACT scores, I wasn't expecting my phone to ring. When you look at the ACT scores, you'll see that the ACT scores for Pioneer and the state, I mean, they were doing pretty good. And that was in 2007 when we were looking at those students, okay? Now, as a whole district, let's look at the reading, writing, math, science, social studies. Now, a district that's thriving, 94th percentile. However, when you look at the African American group, we only talk about when you disaggregate that data, we find that almost 60% of those students are not exceeding in reading and writing. And now if you look in here, even more, if you look at the special education and economically disadvantaged, okay, who are those students? Those are the same kids. Those are black kids. Okay, so that whole population in 2008 were not succeeding in math, science, social studies, reading. Okay, and that was consistent across the district. So then I said, well, let's disaggregate the data even further and look at the school that I was actually working in. At Pioneer, I saw the same statistic. It was no different, okay? And then I decided, let's disaggregate that data even further and look at general education Caucasians and general education African Americans, consistent. They were not succeeding even across general education, okay? Let's look at special education Caucasian and special education of African Americans. Even we had the same problem, okay? Now, I disaggregated that data a little bit further and found out that when you look at special education Caucasians and general education African Americans, the general education African Americans were acting like special education students within that population. So you're wondering, how did we graduate 94%? And then I kept looking at that data, and these are the things I was finding. Okay, pretty consistent. So in the 2006, 7, 8, 9, we looked at the inner cities schools, and the inner city students, we'll find out a lot of those students were dropping out. So in fact, they were graduating 94%, but the African American students and the underserved students, the Hispanic students, they were dropping out of the school period and going somewhere else. So Ann Arbor schools looked great still, but you had this population that was stifling, were dying inside that group, okay? And we were finding that population were ending up going from school to prison, okay? So the academic underachiever, the African American students were currently constituting approximately 15% of all students in K-12 schools, but almost 85% of those kids were not making it, okay? So some teacher told me one time, he says, well, why are you worried about the little small 15%? The 15% is 90% of our population, okay? So according to the most recent data, 25% of African American high school students were at a grade level, were at grade level in history, math, reading, and science. But 12th grade, only 1% of African American students were at advanced level courses. Okay, so they weren't making it. Simply weren't making it to the senior year. Okay, so then I had to look at the data across from the 2005 all the way to 2015, and I found that nothing has changed. Nothing has changed across all those days. Still, we have African American, Hispanics were all below basic level in terms of their math assessment. So what did I do? So at that time, I was looking at the African American males, and I said to myself, well, let me do something with the African American males. So I was going to look at the high achieving African American males and see if they could mentor the lower achieving African American males. And so I came up with that group of students. And the goal was to create an environment where achieving well would be praised and would be looked upon as a good thing, because we had some African American males in the school system that were doing pretty decent. So we targeted the 9th and 10th graders with a GPA of 1.9 or below, and those were called the underachievers, okay? And therefore, any black males in that category, I was going to call them potential scholars, okay? And here's some real data. This is a group of students that I found in the school. These are our African Americans. Of the African American males that were in my population, I was a counselor for, 55% were what? A 1 point or less. And so I targeted that freshman group. And the sophomore, 62% was 1.0 or less. Okay? And so I looked at the current 11th and 12th graders who had a GPA of 2.0 or better. Now, why did I pick 2.0 or better, 2.8 or better? Because when I looked at 3.0 and better, I didn't have enough African Americans who were achieving. So I had to bring the GPA down a little bit and pick those students when I call those kids to be scholars, okay? And this is the group that was working with the underachievers. And I call them the ties working with the saggers. Do you know what that is? They don't know what that is. The saggers are the kids who has their pants down, okay? And these kids were our high achievers, and I came with that program. So in 2009, the superintendent approached me, and he approached Mr. Weeks and said, can you apply that model to the nagging problem of the underserved but high achieving students? Because what he found in the whole district is that even students who were high achieving, they never make it to the AP and accelerated courses. because they would get to those courses and the teachers would even say something like, and this is true, I've been heard from many, are you sure you belong in this class? Okay. Or they would feel that they were representing their culture in that class, and so they felt scared to be in that class. Or they felt it was not okay to be a nerd, okay? And so he wanted us to address that population, and so we were working with that population of the underserved 8th grade students, African American, Hispanic students who did not fall in the academic category, who transitioning to one of the 3 Ann Arbor high schools and who through grade point average and test scores have shown academic promise. And so we wanted to attack that group.
So the program has 3 Good morning. The program had 3 major goals. Opportunity, wardrobe, address the wardrobe, okay. All right, so the program had 3 major tenets, and what Dr. Kennerly has spoken about and some of the things that truly are the foundation of the program at that particular time, and these things still remain consistent today, was a culture shift. A culture shift within the Ann Arbor Public Schools, as well as a culture shift within the demographic of the students that we were trying to address, where it became synonymous with achievement. We wanted to make sure that students understood that being an African American student in a predominantly majority school community, there can still be an understanding that you can be a high achieving student regardless of skin color. And this was something that we had to address within that student population, but also within the mindset and the framework, the mindset of our colleagues. Subtle things that sometimes were not really openly addressed, and then systemically things that were not ever addressed, but just a part of the process of how we did schools. As Dr. Kennerly referenced before, as a school counselor, oftentimes when students are in the offices of counselors and they're talking about what type of class you want to take, for various reasons, students are actually sometimes encouraged to take some more challenging classes and sometimes deterred from taking challenging classes. So that's just a norm, that's a reality of what's going on. So the program focus was to address the achievement disparities between underserved students, and the term underserved is sometimes a loaded term. Underserved in terms of academically being underserved or under-challenged or not challenged, underserved in terms of maybe not necessarily having the same level of economic status, that the economic capital that sometimes is very critical when students are successful in suburban school communities, because there's a sense of a language that, unspoken language that kids can have amongst themselves and also with teachers within the school community, that based upon our similar experiences, it provides me a level of understanding, a level of capital within those classrooms. So when we talk about underserved, we talk about those type of students. We also wanted to make sure that these students that we identified would be eligible after preparing them, after challenging them, and after they took the appropriate classes, to take accelerated and honors classes or AP courses. And the reason why we wanted for the students to be a part of those classes, because those are the ones that were a direct transition to the college where they can get college credit while in high school. Last but definitely, the Rise to Scholars program, we began in 2009 with a group of 86 students. So across the 3 high schools, we found 86 students that met this criteria. And it was based upon some of the assessments they did in middle school, the Explorer exam, which at the time was a precursor to the ACT. So those Explorer scores showed us how well a student could potentially do in AC and honors classes. A second group of approximately 100 families from all the 3 high schools were invited to attend the second year of the program. So within 2 years, there were 186 kids that met that criteria. Although the focus of the program was grounded in academic preparation, was also on cultural awareness too. A lot of times kids do well in school because they have a sense of understanding about who they are. And we want to develop a cohort, a collegial experience amongst all of us. So every week during the summer enrichment program, we took kids on various field trips. The first image was all of us down at the Charles H. Wright African American Museum in the city of Detroit. For a lot of these students, it's their first time actually being in Detroit. Here are some of our summer programs, and the goals of that program are various activities to develop a sense of bonding so that when we are in the schools together, it's a cohort feel. And our philosophy, and based upon the research that we were doing, was that when students are together, maybe one or two together, three or four together, and they're in a challenging class, when there's some commonality amongst themselves, then they're more likely to stay in those classes. Sometimes when you're the only one, it becomes very difficult to actually stay consistent in those courses. The commitment to the program began each year with our summer program. So we brought kids in. They received letters during the 8th grade year, and what was unique, and Dr. Kennerly's going to talk about this a little bit later on, was unique when we first sent the letters out to all the families. Some families chose not to be a part of the program because of the stigma. Why does my kid need to be a part of this type of program? Before even learning about what the program was intended to do, there was a stigma associated with it because of who was it for, okay? So if it was for a specific demographic, then I don't want to be a part of that, okay? The summer culminated with a 2-day overnight stay, and our goal was always to make sure these kids were provided with academically challenging work, but we were making a lot of inroads, a lot of connections with the University of Michigan, and be mindful that during this time frame, this was on the cusp of the passing of Proposal A, which eliminated, wow, I'm drawing a blank right now. At that particular time, after Proposal A, you couldn't use race as a means of bringing in students into the university, or any university for that matter. So our superintendent was challenged with this idea of designing a program that could still ensure that kids could have the skill sets to be a part of the program. Here we are on the U of M's campus. Over the course of these 2 days, the students had various tours where they walked across the campus, saw the various departments, found out a lot about what the university had to offer, broke down some barriers so they can understand that they themselves could one day be a student at U of M. And this is the group of our students on one of those locations.
So we didn't start the program with just taking the students on a 3-day retreat before we did some training of teachers. So I had counselors and teachers, and we trained them in the process of what we were going to do. We were going to do the most important part was a communication training exercise, but a lot of fun and a lot of team building, a lot of work together. So this picture here, is we demonstrated, these are college students here. We had college students from the University of Michigan that were going to join us throughout this whole program for the 4 years. And they were doing a demonstration for the students of how we're going to do the communication training program, okay? And so you'll see here, we're training them before they even leave, okay? So we had a 3-day weekend with a camp, and our 3 main goals were to provide an effective communication training, to bond these students and mentors as a cohort, and to make the rising scholars transition from middle school to high school less tumultuous and more feeling like you're in a cohort, in a group. Okay? Rising scholars became aware of their interpersonal behavior, their strengths in terms of their limitations of working together. We wanted to have these kids bonded in some way before they left the summer program, and wanted to make the program more of a social microcosm of what we wanted the world to look like. Okay. So this is our communication training process, one I developed some years ago. It really is where you have a group of students, they sit in a room together, the adults sit on the outskirts of the room, and the students, they run the whole process of communicating together. So they pick someone in the group that's going to be the leader for that particular group. We actually, for the 3-day weekend, we spent probably 13 to 14 hours in groups, okay? So those kids really spent a lot of time in this communication process. So everybody had to be a participant. They picked the leader for the group. The leader led what the topics are going to be. They had a recorder that sits on the outside of the group that records everything that's being said. They have an observer that sits outside the group who observes and at the end talks about what it is they did in the group. And they could come up with any subject. The idea here was not to censor what they were talking about. It was to give them a process of how to talk. So we didn't want to stop them from talking about something that we felt that was, a really difficult topic. Long as you stay in the process and talk about yourself and talk about what's happening in your life and keep the conversation in that room, we didn't care what you talked about. And that idea worked for those kids. And then they had to talk about so everybody had to decide and brainstorm what they wanted to talk about. And no one could decide, okay, I don't want to talk about that. We have to brainstorm. They just brainstorm. And then they had to decide why you want to talk about it. Everybody in the group had to agree why they want to talk about that subject. And then they had to come up with a process of how they're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it in terms of, I want to talk about sex. I want to see if everybody in the room is having sex at this time in their life. Okay, if everybody wants to talk about it, it's okay. And as long as you stay in the process. So we didn't stop them from talking about anything. And by the way, when they realized that the subject was going to be a short subject, and they get to the place where they're going to talk about that subject, and there's nowhere to go, I make them start off over again in the process. And eventually, we always had a great conversation, okay? And the adults just sit on the outside of the room and just listen. Only time we time them out is if they're not staying in the process. And so we did that for 3 days. Okay. So then we had the summer AP was offered, and I think you take it from here. Yeah.
So we began with a summer pre-AP program, and it was a 5-week program, and the emphasis was on continue the importance of understanding about effective communication, but also on some more practical things in terms of how to understand mathematics at a higher level, how to write at a higher level, and also the social sciences. So this program took place over 5 weeks. We introduced the students to pre-AP work that was, we trained teachers on how to do this work. And then ideally, the goal was to, when the students got back into the regular school year, they would actually be in these teachers' classes. We provided them with study skills, organizational training, and this was also supported by the teaching staff. The Springboard curriculum was designed by College Boards, which is the organization that writes the SAT assessments. We brought in faculty to train our teachers in math and language arts and literacy skills, and every year we focus on doing this during our summer program. Our goal was, again, to prepare the students to be prepared for the AC and honors classes, and following the summer program, they went into the regular school year this way. So here you'll see, and this is the first year of the program, and I was talking to Dr. Kennerly about this recently. You'll see the number of students that were in the program during this first year, and when you scan over toward the total, these were the total number of accelerated and AP classes that were taken during that first year. So of 9th grade through 12th grade students, you'll see 24 students in the 9th grade, 51, 24, what is this, 24 for mathematics, sorry, 24 for mathematics, 51 for languages, 58 in the sciences, and 34 in history. So a total of 167 classes were being taken during this first year of the program. I can tell you that it was a drastic improvement from the previous years. So before we began this program, the number of students taking accelerated and honors classes was nowhere near 167. So to that degree, we're being very successful. And the kids were not only taking these classes, they were passing these courses with high grades. So how are we doing this? Even though the students went through this 5-week summer enrichment program that was focused on learning AP skill sets, even though we focused on communication training, we still had the students go through another course. So in addition to their class they were taking within the general high school framework, they're taking another course on what it was to be a highly effective student. That was taught by, in each of the 3 high schools, taught by a social studies teacher. I taught the course at Pioneer High School, and our focus was on practical things, really demystifying what it is to be a leader. And for these young people, they were really learning what it takes to be a leader in school. So being a leader is someone that's organized, someone that's prepared to learn, someone that's engaged, and someone that goes and actually advocates for himself or herself in the classroom. Someone that does the necessary things that sometimes are unwritten, in terms of like going after school to talk with the teacher, sometimes going during your lunch and sacrificing your lunch period. So we recognized that being a successful student was sometimes hard work. It's hard work. So really prepared the kids to understand the emphasis of hard work. And that's what we did in that classroom. We also wanted students to understand that sometimes you have to look the part, right? I recall when I first began my teaching career, I had our assistant superintendent at the time, who was over human resources. I interviewed for a job and I came in and I had a suit on and a tie, and that was just what I thought you were supposed to do. And he said, you know, I like you, Tyrone. You dress the part. And when I began my classroom experiences, I told the kids, I said, I want you, when you go into an exam, to wear a tie. Okay. And sometimes little things like that might seem trivial or insignificant, it caught the attention of the teacher, right? So when we gave exams in class, every exam the students had to dress up. And then on Fridays, we brought in guest speakers. And when the guest speakers came in, and we were very fortunate, we had an array of guest speakers, from judges, attorneys, doctors, the mayor of Ann Arbor came in. We were even fortunate to have the president of the University of Michigan come in from her busy schedule at the time, was Mary Sue Coleman. She came in and spent some time with our students. And each and every time they did that, they dressed the part. So we got them to understand that going to school is like going to work, okay? So when we as professional educators go into a learning environment, we present ourselves a certain way. We want you to present yourself a certain way. And it might mean some extra points somewhere. All right, so some other things that we tried to really do for our students was, and again, I go back and I speak about the term underserved. We wanted for every student that was in the program to have mobile access. Now, this program began in 2009, and it's amazing. In 2017, every kid has a smartphone, so every kid has mobile access, right? But this is before that time frame where kids all had computers that they were taking into the classroom. For a lot of students that were underserved, they had a gap with access to technology. So as a classroom teacher, and you ask for a student to do a research assignment or to do something that draws upon gathering some information or communicating some information out to somewhere else, if you don't have access, you're automatically, you know, out of the loop in that particular realm. So we wanted every student to have access. Then within the classroom, our focus was on leadership and development. And these are some of the tenets that we have within the program. It was designed to give every student off to the right track, focus on study skills, focus on those things that aren't always taught in school, but they're expected for students to know. Okay. And this image right here, this is all of our students together during their first year. On the far right hand, you have our superintendent at the time, Dr. Todd Roberts, and then Mr. Nick Collins. Dr. Nick Collins was right next to him. He was the person that actually began his work from the Center for Educational Outreach. And in the middle, you have President Mary Sue Coleman from the University of Michigan. We also focus on exploring career goals within this program. Okay. So the program, the Rising Scholars, the work to do this and have a cultural emphasis was very unique for this group of students, because we're talking about working with underserved students, and for a lot of kids, and this is something that Dr. Kennerly and I spoke a lot about during this time frame. For a lot of kids that were in the program, they had a very strong sense of understanding about who they were as students. But most of that's based upon a cultural understanding. What we want to do within this program, every student that was in it at the end of their 4 years, to have a cultural experience where they can travel to a foreign country. And I talked earlier about capital, and I talked about at that time economic capital, but there's also social capital. And for a lot of kids, traveling abroad gives them a level of communication opportunities, a level of capital that some students don't have. Here we have students that were back at the summer program during those summers, and these are the various groups where the kids were in. And you can see they're all together. This is one opportunity where we had the kids down in Detroit, where we were doing cleanup day. And we chose the city of Detroit because at the time, you know, Detroit was going through a lot of economic challenges, and it was a great opportunity for our kids to actually come together to do something. These kids on this particular field trip for service learning actually went, and after a house had been demolished, they actually helped clean all the remains of a demolished house. So they excavated the entire house. This work was community service, but it's also bonding. So when they go back into the school, And they've done something that was this large of a project, because when they first arrived to the site, I can recall a lot of, even the faculty that were there said, oh my God, where do we have these kids at and what are they doing? So we're very careful, and the kids did all this work of excavating all this remains. And when we got back into the school, to see these young people recognize that they did something that could have been perceived as insurmountable, they had a great bonding experience at that time. These are some of our kids actually in class, and you can see them with, at that time, the president of the Board of Education.
One of the things that I found out when I was looking at my seniors in the school is that every senior had to turn in what we call a student profile, which talked a little bit about what they've done and what family they come from, so that we could write recommendation letters. And so I kept over 2,000 senior profiles, and I went through those profiles to determine who goes to what college. I looked at the profiles and I found something that was consistent across every profile. Any kid who had a 2.0 or less, their family didn't travel out of the country. Those families they weren't mobile. They didn't see the world. They didn't have any kind of connection with the world. And so we thought, and we talked about this quite a bit, Mr. Weeks and I, we said that we need to take these kids out of the country. And so we were thinking about going to Africa one year, going to China the next year. And so we made great strides in making a connection with the University of Michigan African Studies. And so they were going to teach our kids Swahili so that we could go to Tanzania. We made all kinds of connections with Tanzania. We started raising money for it, but we didn't go. We got to the third year, which is where we wanted to have happen. And in that third year, that's when Mr. Weeks left the school, and I left the school, and I retired and came here to Spring Arbor University. So that didn't happen. But before we left, we did a survey, and I took this survey from the California High Achieving Healthy Kids Survey in Texas. In Texas, they give this survey to every student across every district to determine what kind of courses they're going to place into that district. So what I did was, I said, you know what? That group that Ty talked about at the very beginning of parents that did not join us, well, those will be my control group. And so I took our group, and measured them against the control group, and you'll see in every category, according to this survey, when we talk about resilience and working well with other peers, if students have an adult caring relationship, if they have people who have high expectations for them, if they have opportunities for meaning participation, if they have caring peer relationships, high expectations, then these kids are, according to this pretty rigorous survey, they will be successful. And so as you see, those are the students that are in the program, and those are the students that were out of the program. And we measured higher than them in every area except for the caring adult relationship area. Okay. And then you'll see some of the tenets of the program again for this last slide. And then the 2010 Rising Scholars, which we brought here right to Machindo Camp. And we did all of our work on the Machindo Camp from then on. So now we would like to share with you, we went back and reconnected with some of those students, and we created a film. And so this is about 18 minutes, and I think we are perfectly on time. Okay, and I'll let you get a chance to see that, and you can ask us questions afterwards.